Devotional curated by VIBEZ Church to help you practice the way of Jesus and be all that God has called you to be. You have joined us for our year-long series titled Devoted. Acts 2:42 tells us that the followers of Jesus were devoted to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to breaking of bread, and to prayer. This podcast was created to provide context and commentary for what you read each day. Just before our friends begin discussing today's reading, we want to invite you not only for fellowship, but for prayer as well. We have created the Vibe Daily Chat Group to offer you fellowship and a community where you can state your observations, ask questions about the reading or the podcast. You can join us by downloading the VIBEZ Church app in your favorite app store. Click Join the Conversation and join us today. And finally, we hope that you can join us for prayer. Prayer happens Monday through Friday, and more information on that can be found on the VIBEZ Church app under prayer. Now, let's begin our conversation on today's reading.
All right, welcome back to the VIBEZ Daily Podcast. It is day 71 of our Devoted series, and we are so glad to have you back with us. Listen, if you are just joining us, I feel it's good for me to say this podcast is meant to go along with the Devoted reading plan. It's a plan that we've been doing since the beginning of this year, where we are reading the entire Bible in a year. I encourage you, you can find that plan on our website, in our app, all sorts of places to start right where we are. Don't feel like you got to go all the way back and start from the beginning. You can pick up where we are and work through the scriptures with us. But so glad to have you. I am here this week with my friends Matthew and Vonice. So grateful to have them with us as we are in the book of Judges. And so we have been making our way through, finished 6 books already to this point. Last left off with Joshua. Judges kind of picks up right after Joshua, and we'll have that conversation here today. But before we get into that, I'd like to start each week with a Bible question, just something to get us, our minds going and learn a little bit about us as well. And so this week, the question is, what is the first Bible story that you ever remember hearing? Again, it may not be the first one you ever heard, but the one that just really sticks is the earliest memory of a Bible story.
Well, I would have to say it was being Noah's Ark. That was definitely the first thing that I remember. I loved animals, so all those animals getting on the ark was always something that kind of stuck with me. And I always had books with a lot of photos of, not photos obviously, but pictures.
Yeah.
So it was definitely part of the first story I remember.
Sunday school, was it a children's book? What do you think you probably?
It was a book in the house. That was just I can't remember what it was exactly, but just always I saw all the different animals. I loved all the different animals,
and it just drew you to it. Okay, good.
Big boat.
For me, it was when the king of Eglon died. We had this Bible book of stories.
Yeah.
And since he was a very fat man and he got stabbed, I always thought it was funny because he was a big fat man, and how the sword was swallowed up by his fat.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Which is crazy because we're gonna get to that this week. We're gonna talk about that as here in Judges. So what a coincidence. Yes, that's kind of that first one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We also had a Bible book, a story book in the house that I remember as a kid. And so I'd probably say Adam and Eve is probably the first one that I remember because it's the first story in that book. And I can still probably see the pictures, actually, the illustrations of what that book looked like with that Adam and Eve story. So just the beginning and creation and how that started. And for whatever reason, it started with mankind and not the earth. But that's the one that I remember specifically that stuck out to me. But yeah, whatever it may be for you, we'd love to hear yours as well. Wherever you're watching, let us know in a chat or in a comment or send us a message. Just be interested to hear that for you guys. But let's jump right into the book of Judges. As we kind of mentioned, we were picking up where we left off in Joshua last week. And so at this point, Joshua has died. We kind of get a repeat of that here in the beginning. But Joshua has died, and we get this period of time between Joshua's death and the rise of the Israelite kings, which was King Saul. It's kind of that first one. There's this period of time where, as the end of Judges tells us, they had no king, and everybody just kind of did what was right in their own eyes, right? And so we cover that entire period. And I think it's good for us to set the foundation here that Judges is a book of history. Mm-hmm. So all it is doing is telling us what happened. It is not necessarily telling us what to do, right? So it's not a book of instruction or wisdom. It's literally just accounting for what happened. And it's good to say that now because it's going to get real this week as we go through some of what the Judges are doing. So yeah, we'll finish these first 4 days of this week. We'll be through Judges, and then we actually get through a small book at the end of this week in Ruth as well, so that we'll talk through. But yeah, let's start with Judges. Judges chapter 1, like I said, picks up kind of at the end of Joshua's life. Joshua dies, and we kind of get a repeat and reminder of that. But talk to me a little about what just jumped out to you guys early. So there's period where they're trying to figure out kind of who's going to lead them next. Anything that jumped out to you guys about how this played out here in the beginning of chapter 1?
I thought it was like on verse 6 in chapter 1, it goes, then Adonai-Bezek fled, and they pursued him and caught him and cut off his thumbs and his big toes. I don't know. I thought that was like really random, just to kind of have that kind of brutality. Like it's a suffering of punishment. But like, I love how I have a study Bible. So I love how it mentions that Adonai-Bezek injects an ambiguous note into their triumph. The Israelites cut off his thumbs and big toes, emphasizing how dramatic a victory the Judites and the Simeonites had won with God's help. Mm-hmm. So it was just kind of interesting kind of how they did that. So, you know, torture.
Yeah. But I also thought it was interesting because it seems random.
Yeah.
But then it tells us that it's essentially because he did that to somebody else, right? Mm-hmm. Like it was almost like retribution.
Right.
And almost like fairness and I don't know if the Israelites knew that going into it, if they just did it and it just happened to be that. But I did think it was interesting that it was like payback almost for something he had done before.
It's funny, kind of interesting how even though he's the guy who gets his his fingers and his toes removed, he's the guy who kind of looks back and goes, I did this 70 kings. So he's able to look back and
he understands it, right?
Retrospectively and just go like, oh, okay, so it's happening for me. But I read it somewhere like that this might have been something to do with they did it so somebody couldn't function, hold a sword or something. I don't know if that's just pure conjecture, but it was just something that you wouldn't be able to fight if you didn't have farm money.
Definitely not. That's real.
So.
True.
Good. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I thought it was interesting that Judah goes first. It was one of the things we've talked about in this podcast. Judah has kind of been a leader of tribes, of the tribes of Israel in numerous ways. But even back to Genesis, when it came to of the 12 brothers that were actually living, Judah often, kind of stepped up. Judah and Simeon also got themselves into some trouble back then, which is very interesting that their tribes are now still kind of leading the charge in war. But yeah, just to see, we've called it out before, Judah is the tribe that Jesus ultimately comes from.
Yep.
And so to really just kind of see front and center Judah taking the lead, I thought was very interesting as well. Anything else that just jumped out to you guys kind of in here in chapter 1?
I like how on verse 19, so the Lord was with Judah. So, God was still with them at this time. I know we talked about in the beginning how they did a lot of things in their own eyes, but at least at this point still we can see that God is still with Judah at this point. So it's kind of nice to know that he was with them, especially because with the armies, they talked about the armies or the chariots of iron. And you needed God to kind of do that because at that time, I think the chariots of iron was more of a advanced kind of thing going for their armies at that time. Yeah. So you needed God to defeat these people who had more of an advanced attack measure as opposed to, I don't know what kind of things they were doing before, but clearly they didn't have iron.
Right.
That's true.
Yeah.
So I thought that was cool.
No, that's a good point. And I mean, I think we know that the people of Israel weren't really people of war, like that weren't their backgrounds, right? They weren't these big, intimidating, like warrior type people. That's why they were so scared of Canaan in the first place, right? When they saw the kind of the people in that land. So you're right that it was all of kind of what they were able to accomplish was because God was with them.
Yeah.
Towards the end of chapter 2 kind of highlights the fact that, a lot of these tribes, they were not actually, they weren't doing away with the Canaanites, right? They were commanded to, right? But they didn't. They continually talks about them not driving out. Manasseh didn't drive out the inhabitants. Ephraim, Zebulun, Asher, all these tribes, kind of following through with what they've been kind of instilled in their mind, been told to do, and they don't really kind of follow through.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, like they put them in the forced labor, right? The Canaanites, but then that kind of comes back to haunt them because it kind of gets reversed in later on.
Right.
No. Yeah, it says they keep failing to drive all the inhabitants out. Weren't they coexisting instead of driving them out like they're supposed to?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, which we get to, again, it's good because, right, we were to go back to pretty much, I guess, Deuteronomy, God's command was clear.
Correct.
His command was to drive them out,
Correct.
right? His command was to get rid of all of them. And so they're obviously falling short of that. And so it's interesting because God then comes back and tells them, like, because you didn't do this, like, they're going to be a trap to you, right? They're going to be, you know, an issue for you. And so we get to that here a little bit later, but like, to your point, it's clear that they're keeping that in mind. Like, this is why these people still exist. And I think, I wonder if it's just like a footnote for like the future, right? Because it's like, yeah, you guys read Deuteronomy, you heard we're supposed to drive them out, but y'all probably reading this going, but okay, there's Canaanites across the street. Like, why are the Canaanites still here? Well, let me tell you, it's because we failed to drive them out. So let me just add that as a part of the story.
Correct. I mean, it keeps mentioning that, and they dwelt among them, and they were put under tribute. So I was like, what does it mean when they say they were put under tribute? Because that came up a lot in chapter 1. What does that actually mean?
Yeah, I think so. My version says it as served as forced labor.
Okay.
That's kind of what my translation said. So yeah, I think it's ultimately they made them slaves. They enslaved them. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Translations make a difference there.
They do. They really do. They do.
I was like, what do you mean paying tribute? Like, what you doing?
Yeah.
So okay, they were slaves.
Yeah.
Type of tribute.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, that takes us kind of into chapter 2. And so we get my Bible kind of titles it this pattern of like sin and judgment is kind of what starts here, right? So yeah, there's again another story of the Israelites doing what's right in their own eyes, right? They're kind of doing what they want. And then God ultimately has to present judgment, you know, kind of here in this chapter throughout it. But anything that just jumps out to you, particularly in this early part, because before we kind of get there, you know, we get Joshua's death again and that kind of thing. Anything that just jumped out to you guys in this early part of 2?
I like how the chapter 2 starts off with the angel of the Lord came upon them from Gilgal to Boshi. He goes, I led you out from Egypt. I brought you to the land which I swore to your fathers. And I said, I will never break my covenant with you. And you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of this land. You shall tear down their altars, but you have not obeyed my voice. I feel like that's such a theme.
Yes.
They do not listen, right?
Yeah.
You know, that's what we talked about before. And so now they're going to be thorns in your side, and their gods will be a snare to you.
Yep, you're trap.
And so that's where we start seeing that, where God is kind of like, yo, y'all over here playing the harlot with him, right? You know, they're going out and doing other things. So we kind of have that already starting there, because he's like, hey, I came to you, you're not listening, so now your enemy's going to be a snare to you.
Yeah, I always love God's like warnings or his promises, like the things that he kind of says are going to happen, because this is exactly like all the people that we see that were failed to drive out, whether it's Canaanites or Amorites or Moabites or whatever, like we're going to Philistines, we're going to run into them at some point in Judges, right? And it feels like they kind of take turns. Like it feels like they take turns conquering the Israelites. So like, I do love that, like, he's kind of giving them that heads up, like this is what's going to happen and this is why. Like it's on you and not on me. Let's just be clear here.
Yeah. But I think we also see a theme throughout this book, as we'll get to it, is that they'll come to the Lord and they'll cry out and they'll repent. But are they truly repenting? You know, or are they just kind of like, God, help me now? And then when he helps them, they're like, okay, I'm going to go back to my own ways. So
I think it's interesting. And it takes I mean, I'm not sure exactly what time period the whole book of Judges covers, like what the span of time is. But, you know, you hear periods of time like they were 18 years in peace, 40 years. So it's over generations. So it's interesting how one generation will repent, but then, you know, the next generation kind of doesn't follow through and just kind of reveals off that sort of same truth that maybe, you know, maybe their parents did have, you know, true repentance, but it just didn't pass on.
Or, you know, they were in the struggle. They needed God. When they got out the struggle, all right, we good again. We're going to do what we want to do. And that's basically what I feel like they've been doing this whole book.
That's good. That's really good. I wonder, though, because Matthew, now you have me thinking, like, and again, I know we're kind of looking at the book as a whole right now in a lot of these ways, but that's perfectly fine as we kind of set the stage to go through this. But, like, I also wonder if it's just a testament of, like, good leadership, like, what good leadership does, right? Because when they were with Moses, like, they said it in Deuteronomy, like, while they were with Moses, they, you know, lived according to the Lord, right? When they were with Joshua, they lived according to the Lord. And as you mentioned, as these judges come, they'll have these times of peace. But it's like as soon as they die or something happens, as soon as that leader is gone, they just kind of go back to their own ways. And so like I wonder if even one of the themes we're seeing as Judges is just kind of showing us the impact of good leadership. Like when you have a good leader, how that can help to really keep you in right standing, in right place with God.
True. But as we also talked about before, they were cohabitating with a lot of different tribes, right? So they're taking on a lot of what they're doing, which is they have their gods and they have their things. So when you, like you said, when you lose that leadership, you're going back to what's going around you. You're influenced by the people that you're surrounded by. Yeah. And you're not doing what the things that God has called you to do. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, so it sounds like we've couple themes we're already seeing early on. Again, we talked about leadership. We talked about the impact of who you are around, who you kind of let into your circle of influence, right? The consequences of failing to obey completely. What happens when you do things in your own eyes, right in your own eyes. Like we're kind of seeing that these are really setting a foundation for what we're going to walk through in this book, because all of those things we're going to kind of see over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, I think in chapter 2, starting kind of in the middle of verse 12, they followed other gods from among the gods of the people who were all around them, and they bowed down to them, and they provoked the Lord to anger. And then we talk about in 16, nevertheless, the Lord raises up judges who delivered them out of the hand of those who plundered them. But then we flip back over to verse 19, and it goes, when the judge was dead, they reverted and behaved more corruptly, right, than their followers following other gods. So you see this pattern of going back and forth. But they get worse though as time goes by. So. Yeah.
Good. Anything else in these two chapters? Because these two, they definitely just kind of set the foundation for what we're going to see going forward. They almost read as like an introduction to Judges, right? Anything else that just jumped out to you guys in this?
No, not for me. No.
Okay. Cool. Well, so like I said, that sets our foundation, and we get in chapter 3, we really start getting introduced to those judges, right? So from here on, we'll be introduced to a lot of different judges that God brings forth, and we hear some of their stories kind of more in depth than others, but we'll kind of get to that here. Here in chapter 3, we're going to deal with Vonice's first story she's ever heard or remembers from the Bible. We kind of get to that here with Ehud. But before we get to Ehud, the first judge is Othniel, right? And so, and we're gonna go just ask for grace and permission now for all the names that we have to say this week. We're just gonna go ahead and call that out right now. We're gonna do our best to say these names as best we can. But anything that you guys thought was interesting in this beginning of chapter 3, particularly as we get introduced to this first judge here.
Well, I feel like it follows the themes that we were talking about, right? So when they introduced Othniel, they were doing evil in the sight of the Lord. They were worshiping the Baals and the Asherahs, right? And God was hot.
Yep.
It was hot. So, and then that's when we see they were sold to
to a king. To a king. You guys got your Bibles.
Mouthfuls of words there. And then of course they cried out to the Lord, as they always do, right? And that's what the theme of, oh my gosh, now we're in bondage, Lord help me, and so then that's when we see Othniel come rise, right? So
but God still answers us though. When they're crying out in prayer, he answers them, and he basically has sort of a savior for them, in a sense, somebody that he uses to take them out of bondage, right? So
he's much more gracious than I.
Well, we can thank God for that.
Right? Because they were doing a lot. I mean, you're worshiping other gods, and he's a jealous God, rightfully so, right? And so then they keep doing the same thing over and over again, and they get mad when the consequences are the same.
Yeah. I think it's a good point in like just understanding his mercy and his forgiveness now, because you're right. Like if we even go back to the last words God really kind of says to Moses at the end of Deuteronomy, he tells Moses this is what's going to happen. Like, he already knows at that point that the Israelites are going to rebel against him. They're going to prostitute themselves with all these other gods. They're going to do that. And so it is like, it's challenging to me to consider that God would forgive and save knowing that they're just going to turn around and do it again. Like, I just think about that personally and practically, right? And think to myself, like, if I got somebody in my life that I know is going to repeat this detrimental behavior, do I have enough mercy and grace to still bail them out? You know what I'm saying? Like, I know that every time I bail them out, they just end up in that same position again, right? Whether it's, you know, back in debt, back in abusing a substance of some sort, right? Back with that girl I told him he should stop dating or whatever, right? Like, they just right back in that same relationship. Like, do I even spend the time to save, right? To pull them out of it, to rescue in the same way that God did for his people? Because, like, that's what's crazy to me. It's like, he really knows. Like, God knows, right? I think I know what they're going to go do. Right. You know, if I were to bail them out, God actually knows what they're going to do.
Right.
But he still does. Like, he continues to bail them out. Like, yeah, now he gives them it was there 8 years. Don't get twisted. They were enslaved for 8 years, right? It wasn't like it was just like the first time they cried out. Like, he let them sit in their stuff for 8 years first. But he does. He answers, right? And like you said, that's what we're going to see time and time again, over and over again. He's going to hear, and he's going to send someone, despite the fact that they're just going to go back and do it again.
Right.
And I don't know, man. For me, like I said, it's just really convicting because I don't know that I show that same mercy and that same forgiveness and that same grace over and over again, despite the fact that I may believe that they're just going to do it again.
Right.
Like, that's crazy.
I know I don't. I'm pretty cutthroat though. So Lord have mercy on me to be more merciful.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we get kind of one of our first narratives for a judge, right? We kind of got a little summary here of what Othniel did, but we get to Ehud, and this is your guy, Vonice, and he had a king to go after that was a pretty heavy set guy.
Yep.
Anything? What do you think was interesting about this? Reading it, maybe even reading it this time. I know you remember it from your childhood, but anything that you guys thought was interesting in Ehud's story?
You know, I feel like, as we've seen, it starts off the same, right? The children of Israel did cite evil in the sight of the Lord. And so we see that Eglon, you know, was strengthened against them, right?
Yeah.
And so that's how we get to this next judge, right? Ehud, right? The son of Gera, the Benjamite, a left-handed man. That's what was interesting, the left-handedness of this man. Come on, you're left-handed.
No, I was gonna say that struck out to me because I'm left-handed too.
Oh, okay.
So I know I picked up on that, you know. And I don't know, it just struck me that that's interesting. That he's left-handed. So I mean, I'm not sure exactly what the writer of Judges was trying to write it specifically wanted to highlight.
Yeah,
it's kind of interesting.
I mean, it must have been
unusual.
Yeah, unusual in some way, right? That they felt the need to say that.
My Bible says left-handedness seems to have been relatively common among the Benjamites, which is ironic since the name means son of the right hand.
That's true. I did see that.
That's real. But you're right, though. I feel like I remember reading at some point that the Benjamites, for whatever reason, had a lot of left-handed people. But I do think it also, they pointed out because of ultimately the way in which he draws his sword later, right? It's important because I think the reason he was able to hide the sword the way that he was is because he kept it on the opposite side of probably what people were really used to seeing. So
yeah, because my commentary says, for that task he made a relatively short sword and hid it on his right thigh, the opposite side from that preferred by a right-handed man. So he's like, you know, sorry.
No, that's right.
You know, help it come alive for us with the side effects. Yeah. Okay.
So
yeah. Anything else that stuck out about this story?
I think, you know, my favorite part, you know, when he did strike him, you know, it covered him.
It had to be a pretty big guy.
I mean,
it's an 18-inch sword. Like, I just want to think about sword and handle. You're talking 1.5 feet That's be a pretty big guy. Like to be able to hide that into somebody's body, that's crazy.
Right. I thought it was funny because, his attendants were like, oh, he's probably attending to his needs in the cool chamber. Like, I thought it was kind of funny because, why was that part in there? Just kind of painting the scene of, okay, we're just going to wait for him. Okay, he's been in there a long time. Let's check on him. Yeah. Oh, snap. Homie's dead. Like, let's find the guy now. And he's gone. Yeah. He left the scene.
I think it was helpful to also explain how Ehud escaped, right? Yeah. So like, that's why they were waiting so long that Ehud got to get out because they were waiting on him. So yeah.
I love how my Bible says in the commentary, it goes, the dim-wittedness of Eglon's servants would have been humorous to the first readers of Judges. And I thought it was funny because I can imagine them just kind of like, what's going on in there,
Yeah.
Just chilling.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so, he goes from striking him to essentially leading the Israelites into a rebellion. It says they strike down about 10,000 Moabites that day, all stout and able-bodied men, right? And not one of them escaped. And so Moab became subject to Israel, and they had peace for 80 years, right? Yep. So a long time, that they kind of had peace there, which... again, it's not gonna last too long because we'll be right back to something else. But
have coats.
Yeah. So there's this brief verse here on Shamgar. He kind of gets one verse here at the end. He kind of comes in and conquers people with just a cattle prod, is what my version says. Uses that to kill 600 Philistines. That's pretty gangster.
I know, that's noteworthy. Yeah, definitely worth being in Judges.
Yeah. You definitely get a verse. You can kill 600 Philistines with a cattle prod. I think I've heard this story preached, that verse preached a few times. A lot of people like to call it out because it is such a short verse. It's just interesting that it does get included, but. I think what I've always loved about it is he did use what he had, right? Yeah. Like he wasn't a warrior. He just used the tool he had to go and do the work of the Lord at that particular time. And so definitely an encouragement for us, like wherever you at, whatever you got, man, use what you got. Well, we'll take 4 and 5 kind of together. Okay. Because we get introduced to one of the more famous judges. So this is someone that, again, if you spent few years in church, you've probably come across Deborah specifically. And so Deborah's story. So we kind of get her story here in 4 and then her song in 5, which kind of tells us the same story we just heard in 4. But what sticks out to you guys about Deborah and kind of her rise as a judge in Israel?
Well, she's a woman. Hey.
Okay. There you go.
And it's Women's History Month, right?
It is. There we go.
But I love how it's a woman. I love how she's, the wife of, is it Lapidoth, right? And so it's interesting because, you think the man would be the one to be the, person leading here, but it's a woman. So I think that's what sticks out to me is like, she's a prophetess. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's pretty dope. But also like how the guy, let me get his name. Is it Barak? He's a chicken. He's like, will you come with me? Yeah. Like,
you come, I'll go.
If you come with me, I'll go. So I thought that was interesting because it's like, you couldn't do it by yourself. She done told you what the word was, So that was interesting to me.
Yeah, I was gonna add, I think to your point on the fact that she's a woman, I think we're already seeing early on that the judges that God is elevating seem to be these unlikely people, right? Like, and we're gonna keep that theme. But you said we already talked about a left-handed, guy. We have this, I'm assuming, shepherd who's using a cattle prod, right? Like, we now have a woman, and we'll get to Gideon later. He's the youngest in his family and from the smallest. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you got to see these unlikely people,
right?
That God is using. And I think it repeats really a theme in scripture that God often is like looking into places that we're not, right? For who he sees as leaders and who he sees as individuals to elevate. And so, yeah, it is significant that it's a woman. Just even culturally and traditionally, the fact that the Hebrew writers would even include a woman,
right?
And the tales and the conquest of a woman,
right,
you know, is something that's already significant. And to take it a step further, like Deborah's not even the only woman that like, you know, does something in this story, right? Like the king that they conquer, Sisera, like he dies by the hand of a whole different woman.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? So like this is really like woman power chapter of the Bible. Like we run this, we out here. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah. I love that part. I love how that they brought that up, because it goes basically, you know, a woman tells, you know, the prophet tells about what's going to happen, and then the guy dies at the hand of the woman, and he was comfy cozy with her too, as we see. He's like, oh, can you give me a little bit of milk or something?
Yeah, some water, right?
And took a sweet little nap, and she, you know, she rolled up on him with a peg and was like, doo, doo, doo. Done.
That's pretty gangster though.
It was pretty gangster,
and a hammer.
but he felt so safe with her. That was the crazy part about it.
Yeah.
He felt so safe because I think they were all kind of cohabitating, right? It should have been, wasn't it like his territory where they should have been pretty cool, like a neutral ground? And then, you know, you thought you were safe, but you weren't.
Yeah.
So I thought that was cool. And well, we talked about her song, which pretty much reiterates all that happened. And then the land had a rest for 40 years.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
You know.
I know, Matthew, you were saying earlier kind of the significance of the song and like why it was, you know, kind of included. Well, did you want to share kind of your thought there? Like why?
It was a way of preserving history, I think, to a part. You know, it was a way of it was a means in their culture to, you know, it sort of is a mixture of probably a literary, poetic, you know, way of recording history and being able to highlight the important parts, you know, sort of like how, I mean, we have early on, you know, when they're leaving Egypt, you know, they have the song after they cross, you know, the Red Sea. And
it's Miriam's song.
Miriam's song. That's interesting. That's a woman's too. So
you're right. Yeah. Sold it down.
Yeah. But no, I think that's, you know, I think it's significant, and the details that she goes over in those, you know, it's certainly poetic in a lot of senses, but it's really, I think that's important.
Yeah.
Could you imagine though now learning a song like that? I couldn't. Most of our songs are short with some repetitive verses. You got like a whole story.
Yeah.
To say that's a song. I think that's interesting. I wouldn't sit there. Well, I don't think I have the mental capacity to learn all that, but I'm like,
yeah. Yeah, but I mean, I think it does speak to, you're right, just culturally, like our attention spans are completely different these days. And so it's harder, but it was also the way in which they learned, right? Like most people were not literate, right? They couldn't just sit and read this story,
right?
You know, if it were written down. And so, yeah, that was often how history was passed on. It was oral tradition, right? And songs and stuff did make that simpler and easier to remember. But yeah, you're right. Like now, I'm looking at it. I'm like, yeah, where is the rhyme? Where is the beat? What tempo is this? What key is it in? I don't know what to do with this song. But you're right. Like, yeah, it does show the difference. But I will say music still does help. Like, I can see why they would do it, because like, even for like memorizing a Bible verse, like if you put it to a song, it's probably easier for me to remember that verse. Like, you know what? I could not remember the fruit of the Spirit for the longest. I could not remember what they were. Until my kids started watching this video, there's this song, and like now I can literally do it where it's just like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentle. Like literally it's a song that helps me to like know it. So like I get like why they would put it in songs. I'm like, oh, that's real. Because for whatever reason before, I couldn't tell you what the fruit of the Spirit were. So
I agree. There's the books of the Bible song that my mom would play for my cousins when they were, you know, when she was watching them. And I can now, when I'm trying to think of a book of the Bible, I sing the song because I'm like, oh yeah. I'm like Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And so they're like,
there you go.
But it's catchy, right?
Yeah.
So, but I don't see how this would be catchy.
Oh man, good.
So
I'm sure.
Oh my goodness.
Although we do see one later that there was a rhyme, and I was like, okay, how did it rhyme in English? Because it wasn't written in English, so we'll get to that later. But okay, anything else about Deborah that stuck out to you guys before we kind of conclude today's reading?
No, I think we covered it.
Good. Okay. Well, that's chapters 1 through 5 here in Judges. We have 5 more chapters tomorrow that we'll pick up. But again, appreciate you guys joining us. We'll be right back here tomorrow. So pick up at Judges chapter 6. But until then, take care.
Thank you for joining us for the VIBEZ Daily Podcast. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or download our favorite, the VIBEZ Church app. Visit vibes.church/devoted for additional episodes, notes, details, and the latest merch. Join us next time as we continue our journey through the Bible. Take good care.